There's no doubt that our thing in the West is controlling. That is absolutely what we're all about. For us, that is the greatest measure of our worth, how well we can control. And we see this as being the answer to everything. If we can control well enough, then that is the answer to everything. So it's no surprise that we bring this attitude to bear when it comes to mental health. And it's no surprise that we go around telling people suffering from mental health difficulties that the answer is to control more, which carries this slightly disguised blaming message that you've dropped the ball, you've let things slip, you're not really doing all the things that you could be doing. And that's obviously true. If I come along to see you and you're suffering from anxiety, just for one example, I present you with a therapeutic protocol, obviously, inevitably, the underlying message is, even though quite possibly I won't see it as a therapist and you maybe won't see it either, is that if you had been doing these things, or that if you were doing these things, then you wouldn't have to suffer in the way that you are suffering. And a further ramification of this blaming message, we're not so good at picking up on the unconscious blaming messages, but they're pretty important, really. It's often the unconscious, well, it's always the unconscious messages that are more important than the ostensible official message. That's nothing. That's just the way by which we slip these unconscious messages into the unconscious to do their work. There always has to be some crude official message, which is purely there as a kind of distraction, as a front. So another ramification, as I was saying, is that if you try out the protocol that I presented with you and it doesn't help you, then you can't have done it right. You can't have done it thoroughly enough. You can't have tried it long enough. So, and yet another ramification that we could look at if we wanted to is to say that, in essence, suffering such as anxiety isn't really necessary if we know what we're doing, if we have all that. You know, if we were up to speed with everything that we should be up to speed with, then there's no need for anxiety. It's only there because we didn't know the clever stuff to do or the healthy stuff to do. We didn't know how to do the things. So what that means is that it was quite pointless. It was just the only reason I'm anxious is because I'm basically too dumb to know the things to do not to be anxious, which presumably I could very well presume that maybe other people have got more cop on than me, or maybe they've got more determination or strength or whatever the hell it is they've got that I haven't got. So that's a particularly vicious blaming message. It even wipes out the value. Well, it especially wipes out the value of the suffering that I have gone through or am going through. It's meaningless suffering, which is something that has been said about pain in general. In the technological societies, pain is accorded no value. It's worthless. If we were technologically advanced enough, there would be no pain because we would find the way of getting rid of it. Pain is worthless, is meaningless, according to the Western mechanistic paradigm, which is a very superficial way of looking at pain. but it is a way of looking at pain that has a certain momentum to it, and once that momentum picks up, we can't question it. If we try to question it and start saying, well, there are aspects of pain which are essential for our mental well-being, for our growth as individuals, that viewpoint sounds a little bit weak, a little bit feeble, and we think, well, can I really say that? Can I really say that pain is an essential part of human experience? But of course, it is. Human life is inextricable from pain. But that isn't a message of doom. It just means that pain isn't a badge of dishonor. It isn't a badge of shame. We're not failing to feel pain. We're not failing to be suffering, not being happy all the time, as a superficial culture might insist that we all ought to be happy and having meaningful lives the whole time, or else this is something to be really ashamed of. Or we might be mentally unwell, in which case that's something to be ashamed of within the terms of this superficial society that we are theoretically talking about. That could be our society. Kind of sounds a bit like our society, all right. But in actual fact, once we look at things, then we see that actually it's the attitude that says pain is unnecessary and that mental ill health is really something to be ashamed of or to feel bad about, or at the very best, briskly identify as an error that needs correcting and then do the decent thing and correct it, because if it's an error, there's only one thing to do with it and correct it. So just at least there's the kudos of being successfully controlling in that case. So that's what I was saying, basically, losing track of what I'm saying. But what I'm saying there is that that is the malaise, that is the illness, this dreadful, dreadful superficiality, this frantic superficiality is the illness. Now, that particular illness, the illness of superficiality and being positive the whole time and always focusing on what we want to focus on and never looking at anything else and keeping it shallow and all of that, that particular illness causes us suffering. But at least there's honor in that suffering because we've come down to earth. Reality is manifesting itself. So there's honor and dignity in that suffering. It's suffering, it is suffering. But there is more honor and dignity in it than there is in the apparently non-suffering state of the well-adapted person who is living superficially and doesn't know it and isn't suffering as yet because of that superficiality. That's just clownishness. There's no dignity in that. There's no dignity in living in a fantasy of denial. So the reason I'm saying this is just to say that if we do say that pain is an inextricable part of human life, that doesn't mean that, oh no, we will have to go around puritanically and seeing everything in dark shades. It just means that there's no shame. That's all it means. And actually there is dignity. Or there can be dignity. Well, there is dignity. There's dignity in suffering. We may not know it, but there is dignity in suffering. It's a very human thing to do. So these are all the sides that we don't really look at when we talk about control in mental health. And it would help us an awful lot to understand just what the hell this thing that we keep talking about, that I keep talking about, this thing called mental health, just what the hell it is. And a good way of getting at that is just to say something like our mental health, which really equates to the degree of reality in our existence, we could say. Where there's reality, there's mental health. So mental health's a funny old term, but we're talking about reality, getting rid of reality into the fantasy of denial, which is our everyday life. And so we could say that what is healthy is to be moving away from our fantasy of ourselves a little bit, just a tiny bit maybe, but not stuck in it, not totally stagnating in it, not mired in it or entrenched in it, because that's a rotten old situation. To be stuck or enmeshed or mired in the fantasy that we have of who we are is a rotten old thing. It's dismal. Whereas, if there is this slight opening of possibilities whereby we can see that there's a movement going on, there's a journey going on where we realize that this isn't me, and that's what am I doing tarrying with this cobwebby, dusty old collection of opinions and routines and habits. So there's a big bundle of routines and habits and opinions just sitting there, and they get very wearisome because they never go anywhere in the first place. They're not fruitful, they're not creative. Someone given their opinion on something for the 10 millionth time. So what? It's a very, very futile thing. So when we see this big mass of opinions and routines and habits and thoughts and beliefs, that constitutes the ego personality. And if we got to see it a little bit, we'd feel, oh, I don't really want to put this garment on. I don't really want to put the suit of armor on. I don't really want to have to be believing these beliefs and expressing these opinions and thinking these thoughts. I've been doing it so long already, and it is all futile, and none of it got me anywhere, and it's not me anyway. What the hell is it? What is this weird thing? So if we could actually see clearly what the ego personality is, we'd think, oh, there's nothing good in it for us at all. It's a dead state of being. It's a tomb. So there is this awareness that creeps in from time to time, and along with the awareness there's the possibility of just going to take up the mantle and going to go through all the steps again, and then just thinking, in some way, in some small way, no, I just don't care enough to go. I don't care enough to go through with this, to voice this opinion or to say that thing that I always say. And that is growth. That is the growth of us. It's the growth of the individual. It's when we outgrow our clothes, and when we outgrow our opinions, our way of being in the world. There is the healthiness right there, the outgrowing of the old mode, outdated, sterile old mode that was holding us back. And we look at it and think, whatever did I see in it? Or maybe we have some kind of thought like that. What the hell was I thinking of? So, whenever there's newness, that's mental health. And reality and newness are pretty much the same thing. So then we can say, okay, well, that makes sense. It certainly seems to make sense. And if we were to sit down and reflect on it, I think we would all say yes, moving on a bit and letting go of all that old shite. That's got to be healthy, hasn't it? Letting go has got to be healthy, mentally healthy. Obviously it has. How many people are going to try and take that argument the other way and say, no, holding on is healthy. Hold on as tight as you can to the bullshit. Because it always is bullshit. Everything we hold on to is bullshit. And also, as they say in Buddhism, everything you hold on to, you lose. So there's no point holding on to it anyway, even if it wasn't bullshit, but it has to be. But even if it wasn't, you'd lose it. Whatever you hold on to, you lose. And the joke was you didn't need to hold on to it anyway because it wasn't any good to you. So, if I can just remember what I was saying, that is a perfectly reasonable way of talking about mental health. That is moving on and letting go. Becoming something different from what we were. Not being stuck in the stagnant personality identity. So then if we do say that that sounds reasonable and it sounds like, fair enough model of what good mental health could be, then we could say, okay, great, so how are we going to encourage this? And this is where we come back to the old snag, that the old problem that always comes up. Because as soon as we ask, how can I let go, that's a form of holding on. When I talk about or think about letting go, I'm actually holding on to something because it matters to me a lot. That now it matters to me that I let go. Therefore, I'm hanging on to the idea that I must let go. Therefore, I'm hanging on. So I'm hanging on just the same as I ever was hanging on. I'm attached as the same as I ever was attached. I'm attached to non-attachment, which is worse. Things are just getting worse now. So when we let go, we also let go of the idea of letting go. And what this means is there can be no conceptual framework or procedural framework or therapeutic framework that is based on this central thing of letting go, because if there is, that just makes us think about letting go more. And the more we think about letting go, make it our focus, make it our goal, the less letting go there is going on. So when the thinking mind gets to grips with it and starts making a map and starts making a route map of which is the best way to get there, and doing this thing that the thinking mind loves to do, organize it all, then we're actually controlling more. We're trying to control so as to let go of stuff, but there's no such thing as controlling to let go of stuff, and there's no such thing as controlling so as to become less controlling. So what I'm eventually coming to is the same old thing that I always come to, which is that controlling really, really, really doesn't have any role in mental health. All controlling can ever do is return us to the old, return us to the familiar, return us back to the territory, the determinate territory that it would be so good to get away from. Controlling can never get us away from anything because it sticks to whatever. Controlling can either act in such a way that it tries to obtain something or get away from something, but it sticks to it either way. It's sticky. Controlling is sticky. Sticky, 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 because it's all about attachment. I want this, it's important that this happens, it's very important that that doesn't happen. So controlling comes out of that sticky mind state. And a sticky mind state is very stuck. It doesn't let go because stuff gets stuck to it. So it's the non-stickiness that we want. Only there's no recipe for non-stickiness. There's no way to describe how to be non-sticky. Because if I do, and if I say, oh, this is how you become non-sticky, so that becomes a thing that it's really important to do. And the other thing is that thing that it's really important not to do, and so we get stuck to the thing that it's really important to do, and so we're stuck, we're sticky, we're just as sticky as ever. We're just in a mess because we're so sticky. Everything I touch sticks to me. And the more I try and unstick myself, the more stuck I get. So we always come to this same point, and the point is, when I can clearly see that controlling is attachment and not letting go, and that all my suffering comes from not letting go. How does this awareness help me? Where do I go from having this awareness? And that's where the whole technology of therapies lets us down, because inasmuch as our therapies are intellectually based, which they are because they all make sense and they're all logical and all ideas, and when we talk about them, we're putting on this kind of we're putting on our rational hat, and we're sounding rational and we're sounding professional. So that's a kind of made up kind of a thing, made up out of the thinking mind. It isn't got anything to do with life, because life isn't something special where we're going to be extra special, especially rational and logical and reasonable, and that's going to we're going to reason our way out of this fix. So I'm stuck inside some situation, I'm going to reason my way out of it by the pure force of my logic, and etc, etc, etc. So that isn't going to work. So that brings us to the point of saying, well, therapy really can't be any different from everyday life in the way that we actually are in ourselves, because if it is, then if we're behaving particularly in a special way, in an odd way, in a weird way, in an artificial way, because we think this is the way to do it to get results, we're completely wrong. So from that, it's clear that we have to drop all that and be perfectly as we are, perfectly natural, not contrived. And that's a weird one, because in the world of mental health, the mental health industries, we're awfully contrived. We're kind of contrived because we think our special type of contrivedness is conducive to mental health, but it isn't. We're just actually being weird for no good reason. Okay, thanks for watching.